I'm Loretta. It's Thursday, which means it's review panel day here on Premier Drive, and today I've got an old favourite and some fresh meat. That's not a very nice introduction, is it? But welcome, Frederick Clark. Nice to have you back again.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
From Mighty Men of Valor.
Yes.
I always want like a little kind of trumpet to go off in the background when I go, Mighty Men of Valor. That's just my internal monologue.
No, it's good, it's good.
Moving swiftly on before I get too carried away. The lovely Ruth Jackson is our new meet today. She's the media officer at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. Wow. And the voice in my head wants to go, woo, when I hear that one.
It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
But a very impressive title indeed. Yes. Thank you, Ruth, for joining us. I hope you're going to enjoy it, so you'll agree to come back.
Pleasure.
We've got 3 products to look at today. Let's start with the book. Ruth, just give us a quick overview about the book, who it's by and roughly what it's about.
So it's by Claibourne and Tony Campolo, and they're kind of looking at the idea of evangelical Christianity, and in fact, if you don't mind, I'll just read, there's a tiny little bit at the front that I've kind of earmarked, which basically says, whenever this is literally the first words of the book in the introduction, whenever the word evangelical is used these days, a stereotype comes to mind. Whether or not that image is justified can be debated, but there's little argument that the word evangelical conjures up an image of Christians who are anti-gay, anti-feminist, anti-environmentalist, pro-war, pro-capital punishment and conservative Republican. There are many of us, however, who are theologically evangelical but are trying to defy that image. So it's sort of about redefining evangelical Christianity, and they use the term red letter Christianity to refer to the letters in the Bible, where Jesus is speaking.
Now, working for the Centre of Christian Apologetics, I'm quite glad that you got this one. I'm sure that you know your stuff, even though you work as the media officer. I'm sure there's lots of things and debates that you sit in on. What were your first impressions of this book?
I was really impressed with it, actually. I mean, I really like Claibourne and Tony Campolo as authors anyway. I've read a few of their things, and I think what I love about them is that it's really practical. It wasn't just kind of the theory. Even so, they split the book into 3 bits. So it's red letter theology, red letter living, and red letter world. But even in the theology section, you'd think that would just be about kind of philosophical concepts and things like that, but it's not. They really bring it down to the nitty gritty. Actually, how can we live out our faith in practical ways? So I think that was really encouraging, and it really challenged me, actually.
Okay, and Fred, what about you? First impressions of reading this book? Had you heard of the authors before?
No, this is the first time, actually, and it's really, really quite, as Ruth said, it breaks it all down to how can you practically live as a Christian. So we talk in the Bible, it talks about how to love your enemies, how to love people and community, and Jesus actually tried to live it out, or actually didn't even try to, he actually did. But how do we live it out as in Jesus' ways, by following his footsteps? And I think that was a challenge that I felt that was posed to the whole book. How can we make practical Christianity real?
And if I'm right, red letter Christianity is a fairly new concept of basically following the red bits in the Bible that Jesus said. Is that right, Ruth?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And there's a kind of, well, it's not so new now, but a whole new wave of Christians who are beginning to say, actually, what did Jesus say? How has he told us to live? Is it an appropriate title for the book, do you think?
I think so, and I think, they're not saying, and they say this clearly in the book, they're not saying that the rest of the Bible isn't important, but that actually we really have to take Jesus's words to heart, and actually some of what Jesus said was really extreme, and I think they're trying to sort of bring it back. I mean, it's almost a little bit like the 16th century Reformation, where they tried to go back to the root of what Christianity was all about, and I think these guys, I probably wouldn't go as far as saying that they're suggesting a new Reformation, but they are trying to really go back to the roots of Christianity. So they look a lot at the early church and the way the early church sort of lived in community and how they cared for the poor and things like that, and they're trying to sort of bring us back to that model of thinking.
I mean, often when you hear about people living out their faith, then there can be a certain element that's a little bit unobtainable, I suppose. On reading this book, Fred, did you feel like, actually, this is something that I can grasp and something that we can actually do in a practical way to live out our faith, or is it more ideas?
I thought there was parts where it talks about one part was said about the hypocrisy, that's the word I wanted to get out, of Christians, and he was really saying that, rather than being hypocrites, let's try to actually be honest. And I think that's one of the keys. I think I thought was really important in this book. I think if Christians are honest about a lot of things they go through, a lot of things they do, their lifestyle, the type of worship they do, their giving, if they were real and honest about all of those things, then I think it is practical to do it. The only contrast that he talks about is he looks at it's based in America, talking more about America and how the American system and let's use British system, but all the systems of the world, they're almost going to fall. And he's saying that, well, do we spend time investing in a system that's going to fall, or do we invest time in doing what Jesus said and actually preparing for the kingdom today? I think the challenge is that because Christians are living in the capitalist sort of society, how do they make that practical? If we gave all our money to the poor, then if we became poor ourselves, who gives money to us? There's a dialogue about how do we survive? Do we have a pension? Do we invest for the future? Do we look after our children? Do we go to work? And if we do go to work, should that be part of our ministry rather than the whole ministry? So should we be funding pastors to do that as a full-time ministry, where they could probably do like Jesus did, become a carpenter, work, and then do ministry as part of their lifestyle? So he questions all those things, and I like the questions. However, whether people really want to take on board that, because it's quite a lot to chew and quite a lot to take on board, and I think it will actually scare people. To be honest, I think that what happens, people, I think it's really good, by the way, but I think that it would really scare people because
in a good way, in a shaking up way, or in a I don't want to hear this because my life's quite comfortable way.
All of those, actually. They might say their life is comfortable, they're in a good job, why should they give to the poor? I mean, they give their tithes and offerings, but why should they give more than that? If they think about buying a house, do I get a bigger house for the family, or is my house adequate? I think that in Western society, it's really hard to live by. I think if you were in, say, I've lived in Dominica, where you can, well, not lived, I was on holiday in Dominica, but where you can actually live off the land, and living off the land and community there is much more real. I don't, in the UK, when you got neighbours, you don't know who your neighbour is, the brick walls are there. It's not like even like say in the wartime, when people came together and understood about the Word of God and how the Bible is. But today, we've seemed to move away from, even in the wartime, and I think it leads on to the DVD we're going to be talking about, but that wartime, people came together as a community, people understood about love, people understood about sharing, and people understood about rations.
I mean, excess has almost become normal in society today, hasn't it? That's what we should attain to, the biggest house we can have, not the biggest house we can afford or need. It's the one that we're possible to get, and that in a way, I guess, being reminded of that, it might be uncomfortable, but it's possibly a good thing.
Definitely a good thing, definitely a challenge, definitely important that every Christian reads it. Definitely important that we do what Jesus says.
And I think you touched on it completely, Fred, when you talked about integrity, and that's a word they seem to use quite a lot. And they seem to they draw on the idea of Jesus' incarnation, the fact that he sort of came into the world and lived among us, and actually, you know, a lot of what they're saying is quite extreme, and Shane Claibourne in particular lives in, well, he's just got married, but he was living in a sort of community, it's similar to the sort of Acts 2, Acts 4 Christian community, where everyone sort of shares everything, and they, you know, and they live in a quite sort of extreme way. But I don't think the book is saying that everyone needs to do that. It's more actually where you are, what you're doing, that's mission. You know, if you're a teacher, your mission is to your colleagues and to the children. If you're a doctor, that's your mission field. They do a whole chapter on kind of mission, and they're saying that actually mission isn't just going overseas and sort of helping out and then coming back. Mission is where you are. It's helping the needs of the people around you. And actually that could be in a really rich neighbourhood, but you have, you know, their needs are obviously different from what would be in a poor neighbourhood, but actually their needs are just as great. And you know, you serving those needs is just as important as someone moving into a really poor neighbourhood and serving those needs.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's an inspiring book. Let's get some scores then. Frederick, what are you going to give it out of 5?
We'll give it 5 out of 5.
Wow, top marks.
Yes, it was good. I think that as Ruth said, is that challenge that we need to have, and there's also that issue with regards to, do we stay in our community or do we go out to someone else's community? And stay in the community that's really rough is actually still doing God's work, is actually still being there for the benefit of the kingdom. So I totally agree, 5 out of 5.
Yeah.
Okay, and Ruth, what are you going to give it?
I think I would have given it 5 out of 5 if I was American, because I just think a lot of it, I'm not saying it's not relevant to us, but there are a few things where it's quite clearly in an American context, and there's just a few things that maybe aren't quite so relevant for us, or references that we just don't understand in the same way. So I'd maybe give it 4.5. Is that okay?
You don't
Can I
have
give
half
half
scores.
Oh, 4 or 5? That's the question. I'll give it 5. I'll give it 5.
Oh,
It made me
okay. Top marks. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, guys. So if you want to look at that book, certainly sounds like it's going to at least make you think. It's called Red Letter Christianity from Shane Claibourne and Tony Campolo, and it's published by Hodder and Stoughton if you want to check that out. We've got the Traffic and Travel on its way. Then we're going to be looking at some music from Ernie Haase and also another thought-provoking DVD. You're listening to the review panel here on Premier Drive. My guests today, Frederick Clark and Ruth Jackson. So we've got a DVD to look at next. Frederick, tell us about this.
It's the story of a person called Frank Jenner question. One profound question changed the lives of thousands. Frank Jenner was based in Australia, George Street, Sydney, and he basically became converted at around the age of 37. And for 28 years, he was actually compelled, I should say, to do the work of God. And he went on George Street in wartime Australia and spoke to people that came past, and he gave a promise to God that he would speak to at least 10 people every single day of his life. And the question that he asked was really what he would go to people and say to them, "Excuse me, mate, do you mind me asking you a question?" And they say, and if they stopped and talked to him, he say, "If you died in the next 24 hours, where would you be? In eternity, heaven or hell?" And that question he posed to everybody that he met. So he basically wants to ask them, if they died in 24 hours, where would they be in eternity, heaven or hell? I think because it was so important at that time, it is wartime. He was a sailor himself. He met a lot of people on regards to in the Navy. I think that question made people think, because no one knew what was going to happen. Being in wartime, death could happen at any time. So it made people actually start thinking about their lifestyle, who they were, what they wanted to get, their future, and it made them actually stop still and think about their relationship with God and Jesus. And I think that I was have to say that it is actually a very good book. He said that he may have even touched. They were saying, about say 100,000 people over his lifetime.
So this is a documentary about his life.
His life, yes.
Right.
And I would say that I did enjoy it. So, but that's what I'll say at the moment. He's a young man, a man who. Oh yeah, one of the other bits of it is that it wasn't actually him who talks about himself. It was someone from England. There's a pastor from England who heard a story and used to use that as a method of evangelizing. And then eventually that English pastor came over and met Frank Jenner, and to see where the story emanated from, and you can see the amount of people who touched his life. So the video is talking about the people he touched over that period while in wartime Australia, or wartime Australia.
Now, listening to Frederick talk about that, Ruth, I guess when I think about somebody on the street, just, you kind of get the guys just doing their street evangelism, there's something that makes my shoulders just bounce up to my ears and just feel really embarrassed. And I always think, how many people actually do become Christians through somebody doing that? But here's a guy where it sounds like it really worked for him, at least in that time. Do you think that it's because of the time, or do you think this is something that still can be used as a model today?
I mean, I think a lot of it was the World War II context, actually, and he specifically targeted servicemen. They sort of said that quite clearly in the documentary. So, these are guys that have come off the ship in the dock at Sydney Harbour, and have been grappling with these questions, probably just come from life-death situations. So it's obviously something that is kind of pertinent in their mind. And actually that was how Frank Jenner himself became a Christian, because he saw a bunch of street preachers who sort of invited him to a gospel rally, and that's how he became a Christian. He was a serviceman himself, so he was obviously thinking about these things. So I think it partly works in the context, and it was really moving actually hearing stories from the people who'd become Christians through this, and it wasn't always an immediate, oh yes, I'm going to hell, I need to sort my life out. Actually, there's one guy, which is, as Fred alluded to, it's how this English pastor heard about him. There's a guy who, it wasn't until sort of 18 months later, and he was at a UK church, that it kind of clicked. So it obviously wasn't always an immediate thing.
Kind of sowing seeds, if you like.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I'm exactly the same as you. I kind of cringe when you see the people with the megaphones on Oxford Street. But then, you know, there is something to be said for it sticking in people's minds, and it may be sowing a seed. But I kind of think that actually, for a lot of people, the thing that's most powerful in terms of Christianity is your life being, well, I'm going to use the word apologetic because that's what I do. So, you know, like, key to our organisation is that 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. And that word reason is the Greek word apologia, which is kind of a reason, a rational defence, an argument. But actually more important than that is that our lives are apologetic. So our lives are an apologetic. So the way we live our lives sort of point to Jesus. So Linvoy Primus, who was a Portsmouth footballer, or Jason Robinson, who was the English rugby fullback, for both of them, they became Christians through a Christian teammate, and actually they were just so kind of transfixed by these people's lives, both on and off the pitch. There was something about them that they wanted to know more of. So I don't know if it's a cultural thing or a kind of, you know, we've moved on since that time, but I think personally that people's lives as Christians is slightly more impactful than just sort of preaching. I mean, it depends what they're preaching. I think often in these contexts it's sort of hellfire damnation preaching, which I think, given that people already think that God's a bit of a tyrant, you're just kind of speaking into that. Whereas if you're speaking grace, love, actually there is a hope, then I think that's a different thing.
So who do you think this video is, this DVD is for, Frederick? What context do you think it could be used in? Who's it going to impact and be helpful for?
That's a very good question.
Did you enjoy it?
I like when I got past the first part of it. I did enjoy it. I did like hearing the story of how it was really a simple story of how you can touch people by your lifestyle. Yeah. I do think it was in context with the war. I think that if that is done outside the war context, and the fact that he didn't target naval people, he may not have had that same sort of response. But there was someone who. There's a story in the DVD about someone else who tried to copy what he did and wasn't very successful in how he did it.
Right.
But Frank Jenner wasn't actually trying to create a church. He wasn't actually trying to create to touch people. He just made a promise to God, and that's what I like about it. It's very simple. I made a promise to God to talk to 10 people about Jesus Christ. That was it, and he did that consistently and faithfully for 28 years.
10 people every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Wow. I thought that's a lot. I think I put my hat off to him. Yeah. I'll say that, you know, the story, I would say, if every single Christian even did it for 2 people every day, there'd be a big impact.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, you know, I'd say that it encouraged me. It reminded me of an old Boys Brigade leader called Gordon Wooderson. He used to belong to the 88th Battalion in Balham. Really great man. I would like something like that about his life story, because he was a young man who saw greatness in me when I was a young boy in the Boys Brigade, and he encouraged me, and I wanted to be the best for him, and if there were a DVD like that about his life, I would really be honoured, because I think he did touch so many young people's lives at a time, again, with the Boys Brigade being like the wartime, trying to get them to kind of like brush their shoes, you know, look like be ready for war. And I think he lived through that period. So I think it's a great, maybe for Australians, but it's a great book to encourage people that the Christian faith, as Ruth has said, is really simple. It's about living it and then speaking what you're living. And if we did that, we touch so many people. But because some of us, a few, maybe not living what we do, and then and speaking it, but not actually being demonstrating it, that puts people off. And I think that what is good about this story is that Frank Jenner, just an ordinary man, 10 people a day, talked about Jesus and talked to people as a friend. He wasn't telling them that they're going to hell. He was just saying, you know, do you know where would you be? Yeah. And then took him to his house and chat with his wife. It was just really a sort of non-pressure,
simple but powerful.
Very simple but powerful. So I'll say it's a good story for Christians, just to encourage them to their walk with Christ. And so,
Yeah.
Certainly
I think, like we were saying, it's not necessarily that we do exactly what Frank did, but actually in our way,
Yeah.
how are we...
A bit like the book we were talking about before about finding your mission field. I mean, he basically used the mission field that was his because he was a sailor himself.
Exactly,
so.
and actually, going back to that book, so I think it's Shane Claibourne that uses the word Babylon to talk about kind of the world that we're in now, and obviously God's kingdom is like the New Jerusalem is Zion, and there's that psalm that says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept as we remembered Zion. And I guess the question for us is, how do we sing the songs of Zion while in Babylon? And I think that looks different for everyone else. So I was part of Christians in Sport when I was at university, and they were talking, they would say, how can you sing the songs of Zion while in Babylon, while on those sports fields, sort of on and off the pitch? And I think actually for each one of us, the songs don't look different, but the way we sing them probably do look a bit different. And for Frank, it was being quite, to the point and very extreme with those questions. But actually, I think for a lot of us, it's just living out the life that Jesus has given us. And, all of my friends know that I'm a Christian, so actually that kind of makes me, I really have to pull my socks up and react like a Christian in situations and really speak truth into people's lives.
That's the transparency. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think that's the beautiful thing. It's not. I met a young man a couple of days. Sorry, we might be going off target, but I met a young man yesterday. He says to me, "You don't mention Jesus and God much." I said to him, "No," but he goes, "But you seem like, you must be a Christian because of the way you live your life." I said to him,
Wow.
"Brilliant. That's what I want you to see. If I'm living the word, then you're coming to say to me, there's something different about you. I have to tell you about God."
Dramatic interviews.
Right.
So in terms of kind of production values, it's slightly grated on me, but the story itself is incredible, and I think actually the testimonies of the people is really moving. So I'd give it a 4.
4 out of 5. Okay, and Frederick?
I'll do the same as 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
Another 4 out of 5.
I
High scores.
I think if it was a book, there has been a few books about his life, and I think I would probably prefer the book because, in a way, your imagination kind of creates the picture of how it happened.
Right.
But having said that, it's really powerful hearing the testimonies of the people that became Christians through him. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, it's called The Frank Jenner Question, distributed here through Authentic. If you want to check it out on DVD, it runs for 44 minutes. We've got just one more product to look at in a moment, and it's some music for you.
The Review.
This is the review panel, and I have Frederick Clark and Ruth Jackson with me. We've got one more product to have a look at, and it's a CD. Ruth, tell us about this.
So it is a CD of 4 guys. It's called Ernie, Haase and Signature Sound, but it's a 4-piece vocal group. Gospel-y, but there's just an amazing infusion of lots of different genres. So there's a bit of jazz in there, a bit of blues, sort of traditional gospel, and then there's a few elements of kind of ska, and then sometimes sort of country. So it's a real, like, throughout a mixed bag. Yeah, there's 17 tracks, but they're all so different from each other. 17, yeah. Good value for money.
And is it correct that this is recorded live as well?
It is,
so it's a live concert.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so initial thoughts then, Ruth. Did you enjoy it? Is it your cup of tea?
Yeah, well, I probably wouldn't have picked it out. To be honest, I think the cover isn't exactly enticing, and it doesn't really say what it is. It sort of says Gather Gospel Series, so I probably would have assumed it was gospel, and I probably, if I'm honest, wouldn't have picked it out. But I loved it. I'm a huge fan of jazz and country, and I think because there's so many of those elements in there, I really, really enjoyed it. So When the Saints Go Marching In has just got the most incredible brass section, really beautiful, and then there's some lovely piano, sort of bluesy bits in some of them, and some great guitar solos, amazing walking bass lines, and I'm a bassist, so I appreciate that a lot.
And I think I've just read a little bit of the blurb here, because it does ring a bell where we've done an Ernie Haase CD before, but this is the all-new live release, apparently, and they're particularly known for their 4-part harmonies. Frederick, were you impressed?
I think their voices are excellent. I think that the harmonies are excellent. I think the bass is very bass.
Yeah. yeah.
And as we've said, it's got a fusion of lots of different styles. At first, I thought it's like the Canton Spirituals, who they've got this gospel sort of tune, and I thought it was linked to that. But as you go further down the album, it changes. And at one point, I thought it was a bit like like it's a big band and a Vera Lynn sort of army type. Then it changes to sort of a light, and it's also got a song which I thought was quite interesting, Climbing a Mountain, which is reminds me of the story of the people
Sound of Music.
That's the one. So
Yeah, it's Rodgers and Hammerstein,
yeah,
isn't
so
it?
it was good. Having said that, though, initially it wasn't my taste. I didn't really. It wasn't one of the ones I would pick up and play again straight away. But after listening to it for a while, it started to grow on me a little bit. So
well done, but not necessarily to either of your taste.
Well,
I think you wouldn't buy it.
I'm in a 60s, sort of 50s, 60s all-girl rock and roll band, and actually, sort of 3 or 4 of the tracks I thought were quite sort of 60s rock and roll-y. So I'd say they were probably. I loved those. Having said that, I think my favourite track was quite a nice, quiet, sort of stripped-back piano one. But yeah, no, I would definitely listen again. That was number 4. That's why.
Who do you think it's for?
Because it's got so many different genres. I think it has got quite a wide-reaching audience. So I think anyone that likes jazz or country or gospel or just lots of different types of music, rock and roll. I think there's something in there for everyone. I don't think every track will be their cup of tea, but I would definitely recommend it.
Okay, let's get some scores. And Frederick, what are you going to give it out of 5?
I'm going to give it 3, only because, as Rufus said, if you choose the tunes out of it, you can probably there's a handful of tunes that you might actually like, but the rest of them may not be all to your cup
of the 17, you're going to find something.
I mean, you've got quite a lot to choose from.
So 3 from Frederick. Ruth, what do you want to give it out of 5?
I'm going to give it a 4.
A 4.
Yeah.
Okay, well, quite high scores from you, Ruth. Yeah, I hope you've
Very
enjoyed
positive
it
today.
If you want to check it out, Ernie Haase and Signature Sound is Oh What a Saviour. It's the new live recording. The label is Cordant, and you can get it in this country through Authentic. So then, before you go, guys, let's hear a bit about what you've been up to. Ruth, what are you working on at the moment at the Oxford Centre of Christian Apologetics?
So I'm currently, like today, trying to get some articles in for Easter, which is very exciting. We've got a whole plethora of amazing theologians and philosophers and scientists at our disposal. So just trying to speak to some of the broadsheets and try and get an article in for Easter. Had some great conversations with journalists yesterday, so hoping that they might take something. I'm actually going away to build an orphanage in Brazil tomorrow, so I need to get it sorted quite quickly as I do.
Amazing.
But also one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, we pioneered our first youth apologetics conference last year called Reboot, and we're doing it again this year in September, so we're really excited about that. So it's looking at those big questions of, why does God allow suffering, how can we trust the Bible, what about God and science, things like that, but specifically aimed at teenagers, so from 11 to 19. So,
and can people book for that now?
Yeah, if you go onto our website, which is www.rzim.eu, there should be a little banner on the right hand side that says Reboot. So yeah, go for it. It's September the 27th, I think. Let me just double check that in my diary. If that's a Saturday, then I'm right. It changed recently, so I'm just double checking. 27th, yep, September the 27th.
And I guess you can find lots more information on the website as well about what you're doing and what you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. www.rzim.eu.
Brilliant, thank you.